Heavenly Father, we thank you for the Sabbath, the time that you've promised to be with us, present us with a double blessing. And as we begin this service, we ask that you would guide the brethren from Canada that are obviously not finding their way here, guide them here safely. As we begin to consider your word this evening, we ask that you would pour out your Holy Spirit out upon us, that you would grant us your Holy Spirit, that you'd open our minds to receive what you have for us. We know that probation is rapidly closing and that you are seeking to accomplish a work in each of us, that we might be among those that you not only save, but that you use to save others. We ask that you would fulfill this purpose in us for this Sabbath day over the next 24 hours. And we thank you for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Jeff, are there more handouts? I have 2 more left.
That box up there. I brought 34. She said 30 people. You made 35, right? Okay, what I've come to understand is what we advertised on this mail out. By the way, did everyone get their mail out where we advertise this?
Yes.
Okay, if you were on our mailing list, you should have got it. If you're not on our mailing list, you should get on. Kathy's right there. Give her your address. Pardon me?
I'm on your mailing list, but I didn't get one.
Well, we haven't sent one out since July.
Well, it was it's a long time ago. We wanted to give was it July we sent it out? No, it had to be after July.
There's like a letter that came.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, the reason I'm bringing that out, if you got the mail out, we talked about this meeting and we talked about next weekend. And if you had it with you, you'd look for next weekend. It's got the address of where we're going to be, and it's on Waterman. And Waterman Boulevard in San Bernardino is where the terrorists struck. Yes, we're just down the road from there is where the meeting's going to be next Sabbath. Okay, and that's a perfect segue into here where I wanted to start was about Islam. I want to do something before there, but from what I can tell, and I really don't track what everyone else is teaching out there, but I know that what Future for America is teaching, I believe it's correct, but I know what it's teaching has consistently been identifying the role of Islam in the scriptures, and the information, the light about the role of Islam just continues to build, okay? But for a long time, I don't think it sunk into anyone that one of the initial things that we were teaching was that, and I can remember how the Lord put this logic in place. We saw that from the 3 Elijahs, from a triple application of prophecy, we saw that Jezebel had deceived Ahab and Herodias had deceived Herod. Okay, so we understood that Jezebel and Herodias were the papacy and that Ahab and Herod represent the United Nations. So we knew there was going to be a deception prophetically marked that the papacy accomplishes upon the United Nations at the end of the world, because you have 2 witnesses there. That's part of the story. And we've been doing that so long that the initial story that I used to tell to deal with this deception, I'd go back to the capture of Saddam Hussein. You remember when Saddam Hussein was captured in his little hole? Then there was an argument, and most people used to remember that. What I'm going to say, maybe we don't remember it anymore, but there was an argument whether the world court was going to try him as opposed to either the Iraqis or the United States. And the argument was, by the globalists, let's try him in the world court because we don't believe in the death penalty. But the Americans, the false prophet, and the Iraqis said, no, let's try him here. Okay. But in that history where there's an argument going on between the globalists who don't believe in the death penalty and the false prophet who does, the Pope of Rome came out with a letter where he says that Saddam Hussein should be tried in the world court because the papacy don't believe in the death penalty. So we would use that historical revelation to prove that Jezebel was actively deceiving Ahab, the United Nations as we speak, on this very subject of persecution. Okay? So from the very beginning, some of the characteristics that we've been emphasizing about Islam, people may have heard them, they may not have sunk in, but one of them is that in the prophecy of Ishmael, it says that his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand will be against him. So we understood that in connection with the three Elijahs. And from that logic, we started early on saying that it's the issue of radical Islam that's going to bring all the world together against Islam to produce the one world government that's going to be in place when Sabbath keepers begin to be persecuted, because that's the deception of Jezebel and Herodias. She's going to lead the world, the papacy is going to lead the world to believe that she'll be the moral authority that will direct the persecution against Islam. And as soon as she has the power and position to do that work, the world is going to recognize that she's not worried about Islam, she's worried about Elijah and John the Baptist, and she's coming against Sabbath keepers. So my point is, on November 13th, on November 13th, Islam struck in France. Okay, and from that point on, if you're one of those people that teaches prophecy, that you like to have a lot of quotes to back up what you teach about prophecy, you can get virtually every world leader, every important world leader saying, we need to unite against Islam. Okay, yeah, there was definitely at 9/11, there was some of it, but not on this scale of November 13th. And what's November 13th? Well, that's the day the stars fell. Okay, so it wasn't 1833, it was 2015, but it was still November 13th. Okay, so there's things that are happening right now with Islam. And I was going to start the notes this way before what happened in San Bernardino happened. Okay, and I don't know, we spent a little bit of time in a hotel room today. Now, the only one that's denying it was radical Islam right now is Obama. He's still unwilling to use that expression, but the head of the FBI is saying this is radical Islam, this is a terrorist attack. Okay, perhaps a bit. The point being is the United States, the whole world is going into a time period right now that they don't understand what's going to happen. Okay, I've been in a country where things start happening like this. I used to go there on a regular basis until my wife forbid me to go there anymore. Okay, that was Colombia. Okay, the Colombians are treacherous. You don't realize what those guerrillas did. I mean, you know, they would cut open donkeys and put bombs in them, sew them back up, and send them into the town where they knew the military was controlling the town, and then set that bomb off from a radio signal. And when it got close to any military people, and I had people tell me, one time I got in trouble, you know, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to go outside in Colombia, and it'd been a long trip through the jungles for hours up in the mountains, and then all the Latin people get in, they start preparing for the meetings, and they say, go lay down over there, and I lay down for a while, and then I'm going to take a walk. So I start taking a walk down the hill to the town, and before long, all these Latin people are screaming at me, and they're running down the road, and I'm thinking, what's going on? All right. I guess they're trying to get my attention, so I start walking back slowly, and they grab me, and they put me back in the house. They said, you can't go out of the house. This is guerrilla territory. If they see you, they're going to kidnap you. I said, why are you telling me that now? You know, why are you telling me that now? So I had a serious talk with this guy, and he told me, in Colombia, both the guerrillas and the army would do this very thing. They would knock on your door in the middle of the night, and if they were the guerrillas, they'd be dressed in army uniforms. And they'd say, we're chasing the guerrillas. We need your car keys right now. And if you agree to give your car keys, they're going to take you out and execute you on the spot. But then A week later, it could be the army guys that were dressed up like the guerrillas that would do the very same thing. So all you can do when they come to your house and demand their car keys is just do the absent look, let them do what they want, and don't get involved because you don't know who and what's going on. And brothers and sisters, Bible prophecy says that kind of turmoil is going to wrap around the whole world till every man comes together against Islam. And the United States may not realize it, but they can't deny it anymore. What happened down in Southern California, that just can't be denied. Came too close after Paris. I mean, they've been denying these other ones that are going on, but this is too much. Okay, so what I'm saying is Bible prophecy is indicating that's going to get worse, and what goes on in the United States now, it's going to shake the people of the United States. I mean, come on. Donald Trump? Can you imagine Donald Trump as the president of the United States? Well, I close down the borders, that might be good. Okay. But he's the one that's rising to the top. And I'm not political. I'm really not. Okay. He's rising to the top the same way that Adolf Hitler rose to the top. Crisis situation, people even in America are going to start making radical choices one way or another. That's where we're at. And what I'm saying is, from what I understand, there's really only been one ministry that's been sounding the trumpet about the role of Islam since 9/11. Okay, and what we're saying is it's only going to get worse. Okay. So one of the things that I've understood here over the past few months is the message now is too big to come and teach it in its entirety. So we advertised on the mail out for here and for Southern California that we're going to deal with the opening of the temple in heaven. And we're going to do some of that, but we're only going to do a little part of it because there's so many parts of it that you couldn't do it in one Sabbath. You couldn't do all the parts, and also because we don't understand it all yet. The most we can share is what we understand. But you can't do justice to the brethren that are sitting in a room like this if you try to just throw everything out there. You gotta just take one piece of the pie and give them a sense of the seriousness of it and trust that the Holy Spirit will convict them that they need to do some further investigation after it's all said and done. Okay, so what I'm saying is in our first camp meeting, I mean, we've had lots of prophecy schools, but the actual camp meeting prophecy school that we had in Arkansas, the first one, we've had 3 now. In that time period, what we've come to understand is Ezekiel 12. Let's go to Ezekiel 12. If you have followed this message for a long time, you realize that this message started with Daniel 11, 40-45. And I want you all to understand something here. You may not understand. It's not important. I haven't figured out even why it's being taught this way. But you need to understand something. I worked at a ministry right here in Eatonville for 3 years. And before I got fired, while I was still working there, I was getting invitations to go present the prophetic message. And the prophetic message that I was teaching during that time period was Daniel 11, 40-45. That's it. Okay. And a little bit of the reform lines. But when people were inviting me to speak, it was about Daniel 11, 40-45. And one time when we were leaving the ministry over here in Eatonville to go to SeaTac, because I was going to fly to South America to teach Daniel 11, 40-45, there was an elderly sister that worked there. Her name was Nyla Miller. Anyone know Nyla? Okay, there's some people here that know her. And she came to me on the way to the airport, and she says, "You need to read this." I mean, I knew who Louis Weir was, but I hadn't read all his books. And she says, "You need to read this. He understood the same thing you understood about Daniel 11. So my point is what we understood about Daniel 11 was already being printed in the Firm Foundation magazine, but it's kind of like icing on the cake that someone like Louis Weir had did a little book in the 50s where he taught the same thing essentially with some, he didn't say the United States was the glorious land. He said it was the Protestant churches. He was almost there, but he didn't have it all together. But he did predict in the very near future the Soviet Union would be brought down through an alliance between the Protestants and the Catholic Church. So he was close there. But recently I've come to find out that the brethren in Southern California, their ministry, they're teaching that the message of Daniel 11:40-45 that we teach is something that we have taken from Louis Weir. So I just want to let you know, if you have any doubts about that, that isn't so. Now, I don't know the purpose of spreading that, but it's being echoed out there far and wide. But what I want you to understand about that, when we were teaching Daniel 11:40-45, I used to always make a couple points, and one of them is this. Verse 40 says, "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him." But I would start at that time of the end. And then I would go to Great Controversy 356 and show that the time of the end was 1798. That's Daniel 11, verse 40. Daniel 11, verse 40 begins at the time of the end. It begins at 1798. And then I would take the people to Daniel 12:1, because Seventh-day Adventists usually know that when Michael stands up in Daniel 12:1, that's the close of human probation. Yes? So that's where I would start, because I would say, this shows us from the start, whether we understand what those verses are or not, that the history of Daniel 11:40 to Daniel 12:1 is the history of 1798 till the close of human probation. Okay, so what I'm saying is, from the very beginning, we believed that that was the history represented in those verses. Okay, but we also knew that verse 40 has a part A, when the atheistic France delivers the deadly wound to the papacy in 1798, but part B is when the king of the north returns with the ally of the United States and sweeps away the Soviet Union, which we mark as 1989. And we were understanding these things about 1989, after 1989. So when we were teaching Daniel 11:40-45, believe it or not, I have a reason for saying this. I'm going somewhere with this. We would teach it from verse 40, 1989, the collapse of the Soviet Union, to Daniel 12:1, is the history that's being covered. But we were also teaching that all the prophets were speaking less about their own time than the days in which we live. Okay, so we would apply the fact that all the prophets are speaking about the end of the world, and 1989 to the close of human probation is the end of the world. Therefore, we had already been teaching for years that the entire Bible is illustrated upon the structure of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. And it is. Okay, it is. So what I want you to see is, if you will, is that when you come to Daniel 10:1 and the angel comes down, he has a little book open in his hand. We were teaching for years that that little book is the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. That's what gets opened up. It's the end of the world. The whole Bible's in those verses. You follow the logic? Okay, that Daniel 11:40-45 is what shrinks the Bible into a little book. So that concept was in place when we come to the point in time where we're looking at Ezekiel 12, verses 21-28. Now, before 2001, this is 9/11. 9/11, we know we go back to the old path upon several witnesses. Okay, this is 1989. When I was here working at this ministry, there was a guy that worked in a ministry in Colombia I'd never met. And he came here for 2 months to this same ministry so he could learn the publishing work. So when he went back to Colombia, they could begin publishing their own materials. So this ministry and his ministry, they worked together. So he came here. And the first day he got here, he got invited to come into an editorial committee meeting. Okay, in the editorial committee meetings, I mean, people, you can believe this, you don't have to believe it, but the people that were there knew it was true. Okay, it would consist of about 6 to 8 people. And those other 7 people and myself, the other 7 people, were doing everything in the world they could to show that what I had written about Daniel 11:40-45 was wrong. And I mean, you'd go in there for an editorial committee that was supposed to be an hour long, and sometimes it'd go 6, 7 hours. You'd have to do another one the next day because you didn't finish. And it was all this nonsense of them trying to attack this meeting. So this guy comes from Columbia. His first day, he gets invited into one of these editorial committees. And he afterwards, he told me, he says, I never seen anything like that. And he's a real mild-mannered, and I know everyone thinks I'm a tyrant and all, but everyone else in that room was pretty good at being tyrant too. It wasn't just my side of the story. It was pretty cutthroat in there all the way around. And this mild-mannered Colombian comes in here and he sees all this. And he was just blown away. And so we hung out that Sabbath. Okay, we went over. Dennis Preby was speaking at some church. You were probably over there. Some church you have to drive several miles out towards the coast of Oregon. You knew some people out there that were into the health message. Whatever. It's beyond me. Anyway, we went out there and we made friends. We struck a relationship. From that point on, we were close friends. And had we not made that, he would tell me, he says, I couldn't believe that was going on, but I also couldn't believe that every one of those arguments that these guys would bring up, that you just shut them down. Okay, because the Lord protected that message. Oh, he protected that message all the way through there. So if that relationship hadn't been formed, then when I got fired, I probably would have had no place to go. But as soon as I got fired, he started inviting me to come to South America, and we traveled around South America for several years, pretty much nonstop. And one of the things I was trying to prove back then was that the daily represented paganism. Okay, so I would use this chart here. This is good enough for me. Taking away the daily sacrifice. But it's not really good enough for people that are arguing. So if you really want your second witness, you get this chart, which says pagan dominion or the daily taken away. This one nails it down, all right? It's saying the daily is paganism. So the only reason I'm telling you this story is that you remember the mother and sister that worked at Hope, the Latin ladies? Cora and... Anyway, we had 2 sisters working at Hope that were doing the Latin department with some other Latins. And these 2 charts were translated into Spanish long before 9/11, long before I got fired. All right? But by the time I got fired, they were already in Spanish, not because we knew anything about the 2520 or any of these other things, or that this is the foundation and this is the foundation of the pillars, but because when we're traveling around South America, we want both these witnesses to prove that the pioneers understood that the daily was paganism. Okay, so we're handling these 2 tables back in this history here. But I don't know how many times I would have had to look at the 2520 up there, but it never clicked. I never thought, what is that? I don't know what that is. I don't need to know what it is, okay? But when you get here, then you start studying what these tables represent. Okay, you're going back to the old past. And then it clicks on you that in the Great Controversy, when Sister White talks about the publication of the 1843 chart, she quotes not only Habakkuk 2, verses 1 through 4, but she quotes in entirety Ezekiel 12, 21 through 28, just leaving out one small verse that's just redundant. Okay? So we began to see that when it comes to these tables, which are the foundation, which are the foundational work, which are the old past, and all the things that they entail, that Habakkuk 2, verses 1 through 4, and Ezekiel 12, verses 21 through 28, are present truth when these are present truth, and these are present truth now, so those 2 passages are present truth, as if everything in the Bible is present truth. But it seemed apparent to me that Habakkuk 2, verses 1 through 4 was more applicable to the Millerite history at the beginning of Adventism, and that Ezekiel 12 was more applicable to our history. So there came a point in time where we understood verse 23 of Ezekiel 12. I'm going to start verse 21. It says, "And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, what is the proverb that ye have in the land of Israel, saying, The days are prolonged, and every vision faileth? Tell them, therefore, thus saith the Lord God, I will make this proverb to cease, and they shall no more use it as a proverb in Israel, but say unto them, The days are at hand, and the effect of every vision." Okay, so that clicked with what we already knew. That every vision in the Bible is going to be repeated or fulfilled upon the structure of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. We already had that concept in place, but now you get a second witness here that this is the effect of every vision. Okay, so I won't go through not because I'm afraid to admit some errors that I made, but I won't go through what led us to fine-tuning the pioneer understanding of the first day of the first month, because I was teaching some things that were incorrect about it. And I went to Canada, and someone started challenging me from the floor, and I realized right away, well, they know more about the carry-eye reckoning of time than I do. So rather than argue with them, I said, well, you're probably right, but I'm just not going to bring it up anymore. We're going to have to look at that one, because I wasn't worried about being right or wrong. It wasn't an important point for me. But we began looking at that, all right? We began looking at that in that same time period and began to understand the detailed history of the Millerite time period, which is going to get plugged into this. And this is going to become the template for end-time Bible prophecy, okay? Because this history here, from here to here and even onward, but primarily here, every vision in the Bible is going to be fulfilled here. So the Lord is developing this truth to our attention, okay? And then we came to a camp meeting, and we had already understood. Okay, let me put it up here for those of you that aren't familiar with it. I'll go ahead and do something here that's in your notes, and I'm going to refer it to you when we get to them later on, but I'll tell you what it is. This is August 11th, 1840. Okay, this is April 19th, 1844, which is the first day of 1844. Okay, and this is October 22nd, 1844. Okay, so this is the arrival of the second angel. Back here, I should have did this right. Should have did it right underneath it. I wasn't thinking. This is the arrival of the first angel in the Millerite history. First angel arrives. This is where the first angel was empowered on August 11th, 1840. And I had been teaching, okay, and I got some flack from this, that in June of 1842, June is 6, right? That this was the arrival of the second angel. Now I said that because in Testimonies, Volume 1, page 21, Sister White says in June of 1842, Mr. Miller gave his second course of lectures at the Casco Street Church in Portland, Maine. With few exceptions, the Protestant churches closed their doors against him. Okay, so if the Protestant churches are closing their doors here, the logic I have is that this is the arrival of the second angel's message, because the second angel's message is the call to come out of those churches, and those churches are closing their doors against the first angel's message. So for a really long time, I mean, there was people that argued with me about this being the second angel's message.
Well, Fitch was preaching it as well that way, wasn't
Yeah, I'll get to that, okay? I'll get to that. All right. Now we know that Sister White has statements that the tarrying time came on the first day of 1844, April 19th, but the tarrying time she associates with the second angel's message. This is the arrival of the second angel. Okay, and we know that the midnight cry here on August 15th, 1844, was where the second angel was empowered. And here's where the third angel arrived. Okay, so now, those people that have separated from what we understand, the separation took place in the very time period when we began to look closely at the Karaite reckoning of time and came to understand more perfectly that the first day of the year in 1844 was April 19th. Okay, and then we immediately understood this is the tarrying time, and this is when the second angel arrives, and then these people that have a problem with what we teach begin to say, look at there, Pippinger's moving the way marks. Okay, these are all way marks, and I used to teach it was here, and now we're moving it to here. All right? And I thought, well, okay, I get it. But I didn't believe it. I wasn't moving any way marks. Okay, so one of the things we're going to show you here, just so you understand what I'm getting at here, and in response to what Dave is saying, is that in this history, from 1840, August 11th, 1840, to 1844, there are 2 temple cleansings. All right? And they all have the temple cleansings. If there's one nice little tidbit that I want to have in your mind before we leave tomorrow, and you can test it out and see if it's true, but it's true. All right. The pot of manna that's in the Ten Commandments represents the everlasting gospel. And the everlasting gospel is a 3-step testing message that develops and then demonstrates 2 classes of worshipers, and it's a prophetic testing message. The pot of manna is the everlasting gospel. Okay, so I'm going to try to show that as we proceed, but what I want you to see is, in here in the Millerite history, you have 2 temple cleansings. The Protestant church is cleansed first, and then the Millerites are cleansed second. All right, and if you go into the Desire of Ages, where Sister White talks about the 2 times that Christ cleansed the temple, you find that how does he cleanse the temple? Divinity flashes through humanity. Okay? So right here, on August 11th, 1840, you have an angel come down that Sister White says is no less a personage than Jesus Christ. Is Jesus Christ divine? Okay, and he has a little book open in his hand. Now, we might argue about what the little book is. Someone might say it's the Bible. I can live with that. Someone might say it's the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. I can live with that. But it's still just as divine as Jesus Christ, right? Because Jesus Christ is the Word of God. All right? But when this angel comes down, what is John told to do in verses 8 through 10 of Revelation 10? So John is representing what? God's people, whether it's the Millerites or the 144,000. Are the Millerites or the 144,000, are they divine? No. They're human. All right, they're human. We're human. Okay, so when John takes that little book and eats it, what is it? It's the combination of humanity and divinity. Okay, and at the beginning of every temple cleansing, divinity flashes through humanity. Sister White teaches that when the tarrying time arrived on April 19th, 1844, the second angel arrived, and she teaches us in early writings, when he arrived, what does he have in his hand? Writings. Okay, and she teaches us in early writings when the third angel arrives here, what's he have in his hand? Parchment. I think it's parchment. But in any case, that's three witnesses that when an angel comes down, he's got something in his hand, God's people got to take and eat it. So the temple cleansings consist of a three-step testing process, and they're always the same, okay? And this is the Protestant temple cleansing. What happened on the 19th of April, 1844, with the Protestants and the Millerites? Separation. Okay, in Ezra 10, verses 17 and 18, or 18 and 19, it's in that area. This is where the strange wives are sent home. Okay, you got lots of witnesses that there's a separation. And what had the Protestants done here? They had closed the door against the first angel's message. So there's a closed door here on the Protestants. There's a closed door down here at this third step in this temple cleansing for the Millerites. Okay, the Protestant temple cleansing is 3 steps, and the first 2 steps are different than the third step. They're all tests. But what's the difference? We never used to see this. We see it now. Yeah, that's what it is judgment. But what's the difference between the third test and the first 2? In these 2 steps, probation's open. But in the third step, there is no probation. This test is simply, it's the pregnancy test. You simply manifest the character that you've developed in the prior testing process. You can turn against the message here in this test and still get back on track. You can do the same thing here and still get back on track. But the third test, that's the end. Okay, this is just you demonstrating the character that you have. Everyone follow that?
Do you know that on 4/17/1844 there was a meeting with at least 7 different type of pastors from different religions that got together to deny William Miller teaching publicly?
No, but it's outside the scope of my concern right now. So right here, where this door closes on the Protestants, is where the second angel comes down. So this is the third test for the Protestant temple cleansing, and it is the first test for the Millerite temple cleansing. Are you following me? And the third test for the Millerites, is there a door that closes on October 22nd, 1844? So they're all the same. Okay, now we know from the 3 steps that the second one is visual. Okay, and if you go into Millerite history, you find that chart over there was produced in May. And in June of 1842, the second angel arrived in the Protestant temple cleansing. Because this second waymark represents the second angel. So it arrived here, right where it had been being taught that it arrived.
May 6th, 1844.
What?
Does that say May 6th?
It says May and June of 1842. The reason 642 is there is because Sister White says in June of 1842, Mr. Miller gave his second course of lectures at the Casco Street Church in Portland, Maine. With few exceptions, the Protestant denominations closed their doors against him. But in May, the month before, that chart is produced. And I have all this in your notes. You'll have William Miller's passage where he says in this time period that the others that were teaching this message told him, take the if out of your presentation. Because he always had an if. But once they had that chart, they didn't want him contradicting what they were putting in the public record. So you have a visual test here with this chart that in May, June, right in the same 2 months, that marks the second waymark in the temple cleansing of the Protestants. Okay, but in the big picture, second angel arrives here and simultaneously marks the first test for the Millerites, the third for the Protestants, first for the Millerites. Once again, an angel comes down. Once again, divinity, the Canadians are here. Welcome. So what's the visual test here? Anyone know? They called it the midnight cry. Okay. So I'm just giving some overviews of where we're going to try to get tomorrow. This is in our notes. What I'm going to show you, I don't know if I'll teach it to you. What's Miller's 10th rule? If you're going to summarize it, people summarize his 10th rule. We do it a lot. Pardon me? Faith, I think, is 14. 10 is symbols have more than one meaning. Okay? So when you come to Millerite history, you've got to factor that in. When you look at the Millerite history as 2 temple cleansings, you have to treat it as 2 temple cleansings. If you try to take the lessons that are established upon 2 temple cleansings and then take this history beginning on the first day of the first month and ending on the 10th day of the 7th month, if you try to take that and plug it into 9/11, combining it as you're supposed to do, it has a correct application that way, but it's a different symbol that way. All right? You'll get yourself confused. All right? This illustration is about the 2 temple cleansings. Okay? Anyway, you guys made it here.
So what was the visual one on
The living testimony. I have that in the notes as well. Okay, so now that the Canadians are here, what I'm trying to do is put some concepts in place. I've been given a brief overview of how this message has been developing. We got to a point at a prophecy school, partially because of the Canadians. All right. Because when I went up there, after we had heard about the first day of the first month, I went up there and I started teaching about the first day of the first month, and Brother Theodore, another Canadian, started challenging me from the floor, saying, you're not right in your Karaite reckoning, because I think I was marking it as April 21st or whatever. And I could tell you knew more than I knew on that subject for sure. So I just backed out of it. But that forced Brother Noel to go study it closely. Brother Noel was living where we live, and Brother Noel determined, I don't want to go down to Mexico and teach this message unless I really have it clear in my head. So he started studying this. Okay, so we got it clear in our head. And we were combining the messages, all right? And we were identifying that the tarrying time for us began at 9/11. It had been typified by the 19th of April for the Millerites. That's where their tarrying time began, 4/19. But we understood that 9/11 was prophetically the first day of the first month. And it had been typified by the first day of the first month in 1844. And the tarrying time for us had begun. And we read that Sister White says the Millerites, after the first disappointment, this was the first disappointment for the Millerites, April 19th. She says they then came to understand they were in the tarrying time. So what that said to us is that you're required to know you're in the tarrying time. If the Millerites knew they were in the tarrying time, they're typifying that we have to know that we're in the tarrying time. Okay, so for a lot of reasons, and I mean a lot of reasons, I guarantee that everything I'm going to share up here on this Sabbath day, that you can put 5 or 6 or more witnesses to it. And I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to give you 2 or 3 witnesses for everything. I'm trying to lay out just some concepts so we can deal with opening the temple. The tarrying time begins here, and here, this was the first day of the 5th month. This is based upon Ezra 7:9, which was also one of the points of reference for Samuel's snow. Ezekiel 12:23. This is where the effect of every vision takes place, but because of Ezra 7:9, with Ezra 7:9, I always had a problem with, and probably some of you in this room have these tendencies, and that's all right. I always had a problem hearing the Adventists over the past 20 years saying, they've already passed the Sunday law. It's passed. It's just sitting there in the Congress waiting for them to implement it. I always have a problem with that because as I read the Spirit of Prophecy, there's going to be an argument that goes on in the halls of Congress, and some of those congressmen are going to take the right side of the issue, and none of that went on. So I just couldn't see that the Sunday law had been passed secretly. You've had to hear that. If you've been in Adventist very long, you've heard those stories, all right, and similar stories. But Ezra 7:9 shows you, opens the door to the fact that they were ready to pass the Sunday law at 9/11. And once you see it, then, and I'm being careful with my words. I'm saying they were ready to pass the Sunday law. I'm not saying there's a Sunday law written. Could be. They had a Patriot Act written long before they had the excuse to use it. But it was ready. Okay, because once you understand that 9/11 has been typified by the first day of the first month when Ezra came out of Babylon on his way to Jerusalem, and he gets to Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month, which in the Millerite history was August 15th, 1844. Well, you realize that when Ezra's coming out of Babylon back here, what's he have in his hand? He's got the decree. It's the 3rd decree, and it goes in effect down here in the 10th day of the 7th month. So he had this waymark, which in the Millerite history would have been October 22nd, 1844. He had this waymark in his hand back there, but October 22nd, that's the Sunday law for us. Okay, so they were ready to pass the Sunday law right here. Why didn't they? Because of Islam. That's the role of Islam. From the beginning to end, Islam provides an umbrella of protection for God's people in the time period that they're being sealed. Okay, so anyway, we're putting this together. We're understanding that this reform line, okay, we've been studying reform lines for several years. The study of the reform lines began in 1989. It was first preached publicly here in Eatonville about 1995, 1996. The reform lines were first preached, but we've been studying for years. And if you take the handout we had from that Eatonville presentation, the reform lines, it just blows my mind. They were so empty. They're about like this, all right? There was nothing on them. But now, when people get up here and do reform lines, they're so cluttered by the end of their presentation that, they were developing all this time. So when we get to here, and we're understanding that this is the effect of every vision, now we're connected with Ezra 7:9, first day of the first month. We have a camp meeting where we understand that from the first day of the first month, first day of the 5th month is 120 days, and from the first day of the 5th month to the 10th day of the 7th month is 70 days. And it clicked. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yes. Now, this is the first public presentation of the reform lines, okay? So if you go to the back, you'll get the total conclusion. This is where we get to in it. That's everything. All right? That's not much compared to what these reform lines do now. All right? But this study that began in 1989, it gets to the point that we're here. This is the reform line where the effect of every vision is going to take place. We have a prophecy school. We're laying it out. And one night it just clicked. So we weren't supposed to have a presentation. We were just supposed to have a regular Sabbath school. And I called the head elder and I said, hey, can I do another presentation? And we just skip the Sabbath school. And he says, yes. So I come in there. That Sabbath at that prophecy school is ending. Because I went through and I looked at the 120s in the scriptures. I found the first 120. This is 120 days from the first day of the first month to the first day of the fifth month. It's in the structure of the effect of every vision. It's in the structure of the reform lines. So the first place you're going to find 120, this is the midnight cry. We know in Matthew 25 at the midnight cry, the foolish virgins are going to wake up and find out they don't have no oil, and the wise virgin's going to wake up and they're going to have oil. Two classes are going to be manifested. And the first place 120 comes into the scriptures and is in Genesis chapter 6. It says, his spirit's going to strive with men for 120 years. Okay, and at the end of the 120 years, it's all over. Okay, once you see that, then you start looking at all the 120s, and you know what? All the 120s fit right here. Okay, so in that prophecy school, that got opened up. And it took us in a totally different direction of study, all right? It was now, I don't know what it was, okay? Then the 70 begins to open up. 70 days from the first day of the first month, August 15th, 1844, the midnight cry, until October 22nd, 1844 was 70 days. Suddenly the 70s in the scriptures are plugged into this history. Okay, so it keeps building. So where we're at now, okay, I'm going to jump ahead to try to bind off my point, is that we know that here an angel came down. Millerite history, it's the angel in Revelation 10 with the little book open in his hand, and he is typifying the angel of Revelation 18. But we know that in Millerite history, an angel came down on October 22nd, 1844. Sister White says with a parchment in his hand. This is the third angel. But we know that this was an imperfect arrival of the third angel because the third angel is a warning against receiving the mark of the beast. And there was no Sunday law on October 23rd or 22nd, 1844. This was typifying the perfect arrival of the third angel, which is at the Sunday law. Okay, so there's an angel here and an angel here. And in our last prophecy school, a brother repeatedly had some dreams, and so he started telling people about it. And as soon as I heard it, I put it in the public record. Okay, what he saw in his dreams was the Ark of the Covenant with two angels. Okay, now we're still not settled on this, but this is the way I'm understanding it. He's seen an angel here. This is an angel. This is an angel in his dream. And that it's right here, lined up with the midnight cry. So he's thinking that this angel over here and this angel over here is this angel and this angel that's looking reverently into the Ark of the Covenant. Now I'm not so sure if this isn't just the two angels that are on the Ark of the Covenant that are looking reverently into it, and that these two angels here aren't the two angels that are in Solomon's temple. Okay, we're not settled on that one yet. But what happens is that you have the law of God in here. Right here, this waymark goes right through the center. You've got 4 laws here and 4 there, 6 here. And they're bound together as a book. You know, Sister White says that. They're bound together as a book. Yes? You know that? How many know that? Okay, she says that. Which means that if they're bound together as a book right here, what do they got to have? They got to have a hinge, all right? Because this is a turning point. This is a turning point. This is a turning point. Okay, if you wonder about turning points, why I'm saying that, there's probably several words. But in the Old Testament, when you read Gilgal, it's a turning point. And when you read Galilee in the New Testament, it's a turning point. And Sister White talks, and we're going to deal with that as we go through, about, she nails down that 9/11 is a turning point. Okay, so the fact that these two tables open as a book, turning point right here, but it also has Aaron's rod that buds, a pot of manna, that's a pot of manna, and it's got, I don't know where this goes, but the statutes that Moses wrote in the side of the ark. Okay, so as this is developing, we're already understanding that the story of Samuel in 1 Samuel 2 and 3 is lining up with the midnight cry. All the visions have their effect here, and we have a quote in our notes that when Samuel is established as a prophet, he's established as three things: prophet, priest, and judge. Okay, so right here, the prophet, priest, and judge is being marked by the story of Samuel in 1 Samuel 2 and 3. But right here, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony that's in the side of the ark that Moses was inspired to record. Aaron's rod was to prove who the priest was, and the two tables are the judge. Okay, so you got a second witness to what Samuel's illustrating right here, but those three witnesses, prophet, the writings of Moses in the side of the ark, priest, the rod that budded, and the judge, the law of God, are also the characteristics of the remnant people of God who keep the law of God. There's the two tables. The spirit of prophecy, there's Moses' writings. And the faith of Jesus Christ, who is our high priest, which is the rod. So you've got three witnesses that tie these things together right here. That what's happening is the Lord is raising up a priesthood at this point in history. Okay, so that's one of the main things. If I get there, that's all I'm going to take. I'm going to put some things in place, and I'm going to close out, Lord willing, tomorrow with the argument that the Lord is about to anoint a priesthood right here. Okay, so let me show you one other thing. What did I do with that eraser? I found it. I'll just put it over here. I know if some of you are new here that I've lost you, but this is a lot of information. You got your finger up like you're wanting to say something, my brother.
You hit the note. That's for some of the new people. What I want to specify for them is that April 19th, 1844. The Millerites didn't quite know what was happening, but God was raising up a people to covenant with. That history is sacred. There's no small reason and excuse for Adventism to be here. They are a prophetic people. And that date was 2,300 days to the day when Ezra left Babylon, called out. So those people that were raised up then went to the midnight cry, which was 2,300 days to the day. First,
That Ezra got to Jerusalem.
that Ezra got to Jerusalem, the second angel. And then, of course, what Adventism does know is October 22nd, 1844. So when we look back at this history, for some of the people that haven't been here or know you well, there's something going on just with us looking at the old past that gives us a credibility that's beyond belief. Now we're seeing this happen again. So I'm saying that for people to look into, like David that's here tonight that hasn't been here for a while, and our other friend here that has just been visiting us, that you brought up, it's bigger than the new people can understand, and I just want to put that on the record for some of our new visitors, that just looking at the Millerite history alone, if you can imagine to grasp that.
Okay, let me build on what you're saying. This, you know, is a bright light. Okay. In Ellen White's first vision, she saw the Advent people on a path above the world, heading to the earth made new. And there's a bright light that was set up at the beginning of the path, which is the midnight cry. And it casts light all along the path. And they're going this direction. But people are going to fall off the path because they're going to deny the midnight cry. And Jesus is in front of them, and he raises his glorious right arm. I guess it would be that arm. And casts light also upon this path. All right, but the point is, here's the point that I want to tie into what Dave's saying for the new people. The midnight cry message that was delivered by Samuel Snow in the Millerite history, it's based upon Ezra 7:9. It's based upon the feasts. It's based upon about 6 understandings. But what we're focusing on here is that after the first disappointment, they were thinking the Lord was going to come in 1843, period. They didn't have a month or a day. That chart there, all it's doing is saying 1843. But on April 19th, 1844, you're at the first day of 1844. The year 1843 is totally past. Okay, Samuel Snow is going to put together the midnight cry message, and it's going to include understanding Ezra 7:9, that Ezra left Babylon with the decree in his hand on the first day of the first month. Or if you're going to use it in Gregorian time, Ezra left Babylon on April 19th, 457 BC. And he arrived at Jerusalem on August 15th, 457 BC. And he had the third decree of Artaxerxes in his hand. It was going to go into effect on October 22nd, 457 BC. That's what Dave's saying. But what I want you to see is that the message of Samuel Snow is the midnight cry message, and that Sister White in her first vision, this is important, okay, the first reference, prophet's first vision, she sees God's people on the path to heaven, and the light that is leading them is the light of the midnight cry. It's the light of the message of Samuel Snow and the experience that it produced in the Millerites in that history. Those 2 lines of truth, the message itself and the experience, sheds light all the way up for those people that are going to make it to the earth made new. So it behooves us to understand the logic of Samuel Snow, its fulfillment, but more importantly, what it typifies in our history. Okay? And what it typifies in our history is that on April 19th, 1844, the tarrying time in the parable of the 10 virgins arrived, typifying the tarrying time that arrives in Adventism at 9/11 for a number of reasons, okay? But the tarrying time is going to lead into the midnight cry. That's our next major waymark, which for the Millerites was August 15th, 1844. And it's going to conclude at the Day of Atonement, the perfect fulfillment of Daniel 8:14. Okay, and I never... We have to say for the newbies, we're not time setting. Okay, the Millerites were applying time. What are we applying? Events. Okay, we're talking about events. This 120 is not a time element. If it was 120 days, 4 months after September 11, it would have come and gone. If it's 120 years, we may as well do something else. Okay, this is a symbol. And it is a symbol. When we go to the 120s in the scriptures, it's not simply 120 days or 120 years. It can be 120, pots, all right? It's just the number 120 as a symbol. Okay, so we're not applying time for the newbies. That's in the record. Okay. So, this is an overview of what I hope to put in place in your mind. So tomorrow when we get to the conclusion, you will have the logical foundation to understand the arguments I'm going to make here about raising up the priesthood. This is where the priesthood's raised up. Okay, one of the other things that we begin to understand, once this began to unfold, brothers and sisters, back here, shortly after 9/11, there was a whole bunch of, for the newbies, okay, most of us know this, but for the newbies, there was a whole bunch of self-supporting ministries that were working together, all right? But they don't work together anymore. There's been a shaking, all right? And when it comes to the everlasting gospel, it's a 3-step process. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so when you see 3s in the scriptures, it's pretty much always going to be an illustration of the 3-step testing process. This is in your notes. John 16:8. The Holy Spirit's to convict of sin, of righteousness, and judgment. Okay, so for the Millerites, this would be August 11th, 1840. August 11th. Midnight cry, righteousness is manifested. That would be August 15th, 1844. Judgment 10/22, 1844. But you'll find that when you see these 3 steps, they come in a variety of ways, but they always line up. They always line up. Sin, righteousness, okay? When they were proclaiming the midnight cry message, they were illustrating a righteous work. Okay, one of the 3 steps is, Jesus is what? What is Jesus? He's the way, truth, and the life. Okay, so if you plug this in now to 9/11 and the 3-step testing process, if this is 9/11, how is Jesus the way at 9/11? The old path. Many witnesses. Jeremiah 6:16, stand ye in the way and see and ask for the old paths. Where is the good way? And walk therein, and you shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein. And I set watchmen among you, saying, hearken to the sound of the trumpet. But they said, we will not hearken. Okay. So the way is here. What's the truth? This is why there isn't 200 people here tomorrow. Because the next waymark is an argument over truth. Okay, it's an argument over truth. It's a shaking over truth. And you know, there's 2 ways that this shaking gets accomplished. One side of the shaking is going to present the truth as they understand it. Well, they might not do it in the most clear way. They might not do it in a way that satisfies everyone that they are joyful and friendly and kind. But the other side, it doesn't worry about truth. What's it worry about? Messenger. One side's doing the message, the other's doing messenger. That's right in here, brothers and sisters. That's just what has happened in this history. An argument over truth that is divided in 2 classes, either a class that's standing with the message or a class that's dealing with the messengers, character, personality, that lead you to the life at the judgment, or death at the judgment. If you're a foolish virgin, you get the other side of the equation, right? Wise virgin gets life. So, this being the everlasting gospel, being a temple cleansing, being many things, we plug it in first from 9/11 to the midnight cry. Okay, a lot of reasons to do that. But, and this is the part that even for those of us that aren't newbies, this is the part that is still so new that it hasn't settled in with everyone. In our history, from 9/11 to the midnight cry. This is 9/11. To the midnight cry, if we're going to do it this way, to the Sunday law. In our history, there is going to be a 3-step testing process here, and then a 3-step testing process here. Okay? But in this history that we're dealing with here, from 9/11 to the midnight cry, when you get to the 3rd test, this is the litmus test. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You're either acid or you're alkaline. You're just going to manifest the character that you've previously developed in these 2 tests. This here is the binding off period. Because Sister White says the 3rd angel that seals us binds us, either as faggots for the fire of destruction or wheat for the heavenly garner. One way or the other, we get bound in this step. And we understand now that this step here is illustrated repeatedly in the Scriptures, repeatedly in a variety of ways. There is something that goes on in this history to God's faithful people that is, it's too profound even to explain what we even know about it, but you can tell we don't understand everything yet. It's being opened up right now, okay? So this binding off period is something that also has come out of this development that we will refer to this week. Go to the last page of your notes. No, go to the page before. Go to page 31. All I want to do is show you where I'm going to try to get to tomorrow. And I will get there. When we get to the point, if I haven't covered all the little planks along the way, I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to close out on this, Lord willing. But in the middle of page 31, there's a quote from Selected Messages, Book 3, page 385, that says, "The great issue near at hand will weed out those whom God has not appointed, and he will have a pure, true, sanctified ministry prepared for the latter rain." Okay, there's a promise there in the spirit of prophecy that before the latter rain is poured out in its fullness, the Lord is going to prepare a ministry. Okay? And this is in agreement with what we as Adventists understand about the church triumphant. Okay? But go to Isaiah 61. I want you to see this, a second witness to this, and see how Isaiah says it. And I'm sure if you've been Adventist very long that you're familiar with Isaiah 61, because right after Jesus' baptism, he goes into a church and he opens to Isaiah 61 and he reads these very verses. Therefore, Sister White has commented on these verses more than once. Okay, you got the Bible, you got Isaiah, you got Jesus repeating it in the New Testament, and Sister White's comment on it. And it's clear that Sister White is saying that he's giving an example of what our work is to be. Okay, but he is anointed at his baptism. That's 9/11. So he's given us an illustration about what the work is going to be after 9/11, because 9/11 is where the divine symbol comes down. You follow me? So in Isaiah 61 it says this: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, and proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. And they shall build the old waste places, the old wastes, and they shall raise up the former desolations, and they shall repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations. And strangers shall stand and feed your flocks, and the sons of the aliens shall be your plowmen and your vine dressers. But ye shall be named the priests of the Lord. Men shall call you the ministers of our God. Ye shall eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory shall you boast yourselves. For your shame ye shall have what? And for your confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess the double everlasting joy shall be unto them. Now we know on many witnesses that there's a doubling at the midnight cry. And what I'm going to try to show this week, in agreement with the story of Samuel, which is the restoration of the priesthood, that when Sister White says the Lord is going to have a pure, true ministry prepared for the latter rain, they get anointed to do that work right here at the midnight cry. And that's what Isaiah is saying also. These ministers are going to be priests. Okay, so this here is the waymark that's just ahead of us. Everyone in this room is being called to be one of those ministers, one of those priests. All right, so on October 22nd, 1844, go to Revelation 11. Verse 19. Millerites correctly understood that verse 19 is October 22nd, 1844. And it says, "And the temple of God was open in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail." On October 22nd, 1844, those that followed Christ by faith into the most holy place is open to them, and Sister White immediately begins to have visions. So does Hiram Edson. The next day, he's seeing this. The temple is being open in heaven, and they're seeing the ark. Right here, they're seeing the law of God. They're seeing the Sabbath. Okay? So that was the imperfect fulfillment of Daniel 8:14. There was no Sunday law there. And I'm saying imperfect because Sister White uses the word perfect when she talks about the second angel's message in the Millerite history. She says it was fulfilled, but it was not the perfect fulfillment. The perfect fulfillment of the second angel's message is in our history at the end of the world. Therefore, the perfect fulfillment of the third angel is in our history at the end of the world. The third angel becomes present truth when a Sunday law is actually passed. Right here, for a number of reasons, this is the perfect fulfillment of the opening of the temple. But, and this for the newbies, this is almost wrong that I'm going to do this. What we understand about fractals now tells us that the characteristics of the Sunday law are also seen at the midnight cry, and therefore at the midnight cry the temple is opened. All right. So the truths that we're looking at now that are based upon approaching or applying something specifically at this waymark are truths that are connected with Christ opening the temple. And when the prophets saw Christ in the temple, such as Isaiah and Ezekiel and Moses and Daniel, they had a specific experience that took place. And that's the experience that we must have if we're going to be the priests in this history. If we don't have that experience, then we're going to do what Daniel's companions did when Daniel saw Christ in the Mara vision. The men that were with him fled. They ran away because there's a separation in this history. So, okay, lots of... One thing I started on and I never pulled the trigger on. I'm not prepared. I won't spend any time on it, but I can't pass by it. These waymarks, they're turning points in both the history of the nations and the church. That's the way Sister White defines it. Was 9/11 a turning point in the history of the nations? Oh yeah. Was it a turning point in the history of Seventh-day Adventist Church? Yeah, Patriot Act and spiritual formation. You got two legal documents mark that history. Okay, so all of these you can show are turning points. So when you see the turning points, you begin to understand that when Ezekiel's looking into the temple and he's seeing wheels within wheels, these wheels are associated with these turning points. Okay, and these turning points create high arches. And when Ezekiel's talking about these arches that he sees, the arch of the history that's being covered, Ezekiel's amazed at what he's seeing. Okay, so there's things that are happening with this reform line that allow us to see into the temple that we never saw before. And the things that we're seeing in there are things that are directly connected with what's going on in God's church and in the world today. It's serious stuff. So let's go to page 1. See how far we can get. Pardon me? My time is up. So on page 1, I want you to see something, especially for the newbies. Prophets and Kings, page 571. Now, if you are new to this message, you may not be aware that every reform movement has a time at the end. Okay, for the Millerites it was 1798. For us it was 1989. For the time of Christ it was the birth of Jesus. For the time of Moses it was the birth of Moses. Every reform line has a time at the end. It's a waymark. Okay, and based upon the Millerite history, we know that at the time of the end, the first message arrives at this time period, the time of the end. So the first angel arrives here, and there comes a point in time, every time, where the first message is empowered. Every message first arrives and thereafter is empowered. In the Millerite history, on April 19th, 1844, the second angel arrives, and it's empowered at the midnight cry. And then on October 22nd, 1844, the third angel arrives. When's it empowered? 9/11. Okay. The Lord wanted to empower it in 1888. Brethren wouldn't receive that light. Okay, so where was I going with this? All right. So when the 1888. What did I say? 1988. I meant 1888. Jones and Wagner. When the first angel is empowered, you're going to see an angel descend, a divine symbol. Okay, you got to see this if you haven't noticed it before. Moses is heading back to Egypt to do his work, and an angel of the Lord comes down and confronts him with circumcision. And Sister White says, had he not circumcised his son, he would have been powerless to stand before Pharaoh. What empowers his message is that he was faithful in every detail, including circumcision. Okay, but Moses is that's the beginning of ancient Israel. It's typifying the end of ancient Israel. And the end of ancient Israel, Moses has typified Christ. And Christ's empowerment comes at his baptism. And baptism is what replaces circumcision. So you're seeing these two waymarks. Right here, this is the circumcision in the story of Moses. This is the baptism of Christ. This is the angel of Revelation 10 descending. This is the angel of Revelation 18 descending. And in the history of the three decrees, this is the empowerment of the first decree, and Cyrus is the one that gives the first decree, Darius the second, and Artaxerxes the third. So this first paragraph is talking about a divine symbol coming down in Daniel chapter 10 to empower the first decree of Cyrus. And it says this, for 3 weeks Gabriel wrestled with the powers of darkness, seeking to counteract the influence at work on the mind of Cyrus. And before the contest closed, Christ himself came to Gabriel's aid. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, Gabriel declares, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. And here's what I want you to see, though, the boldface. All that heaven could do in behalf of the people of God was done. The victory was finally gained. The forces of the enemy were held in check all the days of Cyrus and all the days of his son Cambyses, who reigned about 7.5 years. right here, this is when Christ comes down as Michael and struggles with Cyrus in that reform line. And what happens? There's a restraint put on the enemies. Okay, you got to see that, because when this angel comes down on August 11th, 1840, Islam is restrained. And in our history, on 9/11, George Bush goes to the United Nations, and Islam is restrained. When the angel comes down, you're going to see a restraint put upon someone. Okay, now notice the next quote. This is in the, what do they call it? The back of the book? Appendix. Okay, and it's an explanation of something that Sister White says. It says that this view was given in 1847 when there were but very few of the Advent brethren observing the Sabbath, and of these but few supposed that its observance was of sufficient importance to draw a line between the people of God and unbelievers. Now the fulfillment of that view is beginning to be seen. The commencement of that time of trouble here mentioned does not refer to the time when the plague shall be begin to be poured out, but to a short period just before they're poured out while Christ is in the sanctuary. At that time, while the work of salvation is closing, trouble will be coming upon the earth, and the nations will be angry, yet held in check. This is the role of Islam, is to anger the nations, bring every man together against them, but as they do so, they're held in check. Okay? So as not to prevent the work of the third angel. At that time, when Islam angers the nations and is also held in check, at that time, the latter rain, or refreshing from the presence of the Lord, will come to give power to the loud voice of the third angel. I'm wanting you to see that when it comes to Islam, it's the restraint that's placed upon it that's often emphasized. There's lots of components to Islam, but one of them is a restraint. 9/11, Islam was restrained by George Bush and the United Nations. And this symbol of the divine symbol coming down in these reform lines emphasizes a restraint. All the days of Cyrus and Cambyses, the enemies, were held in check so that God's people could do the work. All right, there was a restraint mark there. Isaiah 27:8, a restraint. All right, you got that in your notes. Let's go to Isaiah 27:8. Isaiah 27:1 through 9 are really good verses, but I'm just trying to pull out verse 8, where it says, "In measure when it shooteth forth, thou wilt debate with it. He stayeth his rough wind in the day of the east wind." Now, all the prophets, 1 Corinthians 14:32, it says the spirit of the prophets are subject to the prophets. All the prophets agree with one another. So here Isaiah is talking about a rough wind being stayed, restrained, in the day of the east wind. In Islam and Bible prophecy, it's the children of the east, and they're often associated with the wind. One of the 12 sons of Ishmael's name means breath. Okay, and so there's a restraint placed upon this east wind at 9/11 that's in agreement with the restraint that was placed upon the enemies during the time of Cyrus, with the restraint that was placed upon Islam on August 11th, 1840, and with the restraint that is put upon Islam in Revelation 9, verse 4. Go to Revelation 9, verse 4. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And brothers and sisters, if you're not familiar with the fifth trumpet, which is the first woe, it's right here on this chart, right here. And on this chart here. And this is the sixth trumpet, second woe. This is the sixth trumpet, second woe. Sister White says this chart was directed by the hand of the Lord and should not be altered, that the Lord held his hand over a mistake in some of the figures on this chart. And when this chart is produced in 1850, the mistake is corrected because the mistake was the year 1843. This column here, is the column of the 2520 that begins with the captivity of Manasseh in 677 and it comes down here, they thought to 1843. But this was where he held his hand over these two 43s up there. So when they correct that mistake, here's the column for the 2520. Here it begins up there at the top, 677. Now it ends in 1844. The point I'm trying to make here is the only correction they were making is on this date of the 2300 and the 2520. But what they taught about the fifth trumpet, first woe, sixth trumpet, second woe, is on both these charts. And if you go into Uriah Smith's book, Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation, and you look at his commentary on Revelation 9, verse 4, he'll tell you about the decree of Abu Bakr, which said to the Islamic warriors in the time period of Revelation 9:4 that when you go forth to conquer the world for Islam, you're going to find two kinds of Christians. You're going to find Sunday-keeping Christians and Seventh-day Sabbath-keeping Christians. Leave those Sabbath-keeping Christians alone. But the Sunday-keeping Christians, they either convert to Islam or cut their head off. So in Revelation 9, verse 4, there's a restraint put upon Islam. They can't just kill anyone. They got to make a distinction between the Sabbath keepers and the rest of the world. Okay, so there's a restraint placed upon them. From the very beginning, there's a restraint put upon Islam. Who's the father of Islam? Ishmael. How was he restrained? Paul talks about it, not the way I'm talking about, but he talks about it in the New Testament. What's Paul say about? How does Paul talk about Ishmael's mom? The son of the bondwoman. She's the bondwoman. And what's he say? When he's quoting this story in Genesis, what does Paul say? Well, he's repeating what Abraham told to Sarah. Do what you want with her. And what did Sarah want to do? Cast her out. What was Sarah doing to Ishmael and Hagar? Putting a restraint on him. Why is that a restraint? Because Hagar had been there taunting Sarah. I've got a child and you don't. Okay, so, and then when Isaac is born, there is this strife going on. Cast her out. There's a restraint on Islam from the beginning of the scriptures all the way to the end. Okay, so one more quote, and then we'll read this quote so we can say we got off page 1. All right, and then there's one other thing I want to show you in closing. We were supposed to start at 6:30, and if that's right, it's 8:30 now, right? Okay, last quote, bottom of page 1. What I'm going to show you here now is that because we're understanding Islam is a symbol in Bible prophecy that has to do with the sealing of the 144,000, we're going to see a hold marked. We know that when Michael stands up, the four winds are fully released. Okay? But we have a passage in the Spirit of Prophecy where there are 4 holds put on the record, and this is where those 4 holds go. Now, there is much to say about this. What I'm wanting you to see, as much as the light of this, is that this message is developing and it's staying on target. The things that are coming to light are building upon what already has been established, and they're putting clarity into this reform line that is amazing. Now, I know those of you that have been studying this for a long time, you're already familiar with the hold, but we'll read it for those people that may watch this over the net. I saw 4 angels who had a work to do on earth and were on their way to accomplish it. Jesus was clothed with priestly garments. He gazed in pity on the remnant, then raised his hands and with a voice of deep pity cried, "My blood, Father, my blood, my blood, my blood." Then I saw an exceeding bright light come from God, who sat upon the great white throne and was shed all about Jesus. Then I saw an angel with a commission from Jesus, swiftly flying to the 4 angels who had a work to do on the earth, and waving something up and down in his hand, and crying with a loud voice, "Hold, hold, 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 until the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads." I asked my accompanying angel the meaning of what I had heard and what the 4 angels were about to do. He said to me that it was God that restrained the powers, and that he gave his angels charge over things on the earth, and that the 4 angels had power from God to hold the 4 winds. And notice, if these 4 winds are Islam, and Sister White pretty much says it black and white, that what's being emphasized is their restraint. Okay, you got to see their restraint. And they were about to let them go, but while their hands were loosening and the 4 winds were about to blow, that's an important point. Okay, I'm going to tell you that Islam gets restrained, and they do at these different waymarks, but Sister White says their hands are loosening. Have you seen their hands loosening in the past 4 or 5 days? Okay, they're being held in check, but they're loosening. Okay, the merciful eye of Jesus gazed upon the remnant that were not sealed, and he raised his hands to the Father and pleaded with him that he had spilled his blood for them. Then another angel was commissioned to fly swiftly to the 4 angels and bid them hold until the servants of God were sealed with the seal of the living God in their foreheads. Okay, we have more to say about Islam this Sabbath day, and let me close with one thing. Part of this shaking that took place over truth, because the 3-step testing process for us is the way, the truth, and the life. And when we got to this argument over truth and error, it began pretty much in the book of Joel. And there's one brother that put an argument in place. I never understood why this argument was put in place until I spent some time with the brethren in Jamaica this last week. There's more to it than meets the eye. But when I first heard this argument, it was just, this is the worst, well, not the worst, but it was a really poor application of prophecy, all right? In the book of Joel, it came to pass that there was 3 different views of what this army in Joel is. Okay? It's either the armies of Rome at the end of the world, the king of the north, the papacy, in connection with the United States and the United Nations, modern Babylon. Or some are saying it's Islam, the armies of Islam. And some are even saying that it's 144,000. Okay, when this all started, someone said that verse 8 is proving suicide bombers. Okay, so let's read verse 8 of chapter 2 of Joel. Maybe you guys already have this one all solved. It was solved for me. I didn't have a problem, but it just amazes me how... Anyway, verse 8 says, "Neither shall one thrust another. They shall walk everyone in his path. When they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded." Now, the argument here is that this is proving that this army in this passage is radical Islam, because radical Islam believes that as soon as it blows itself up and murders a bunch of people, that it's going to be in heaven with a bunch of virgins, right? Okay, so it's reading into this verse what radical Islam thinks is going to happen. But do you think that's going to happen? Okay, even if somehow they were going to be saved, they're not going to be saved until the resurrection, right? They're going to go to sleep. They don't go. It's totally absurd to accept that concept from radical Islam in the first place. But to take this passage where it says, "When they shall fall upon their sword, they shall not be wounded." Okay, then they go to verses where some of the kings fell upon their sword to die. So when you fall on the sword, you die. But Islam goes straight to heaven with the virgins, so this has got to be the armies of Islam. You ever heard that argument? Okay, I never went down that road because I just thought, what right have we got to take the teachings of Islam and use them as a rule of thumb on this verse? Okay, but there was a pretty big controversy over here. But why am I going here? Because this is about Islam. Okay, Islam is a subject that we have to understand in this history. Believe it or not, you have to understand Islam in this history if you're going to understand this message. And this message has been designed by God to sanctify us and prepare us to be among that ministry of priests. So we have to understand it correctly. So if you're going to use William Miller's rules of prophetic interpretation, what army does this have to be in verse 8? Anyone got a good answer? And this blows my mind, why this answer didn't come to the surface right in the beginning of this discussion. Anyone, the closing question for this evening. What's your, verse 8, I'll read it again. Neither shall one thrust another. They shall walk everyone in his path, and when they shall fall on their sword, they shall not be wounded. This army, when it falls on its sword, it shall not be wounded. Pardon me? There's a thought for you. God's people. You know what blows my mind about it? Is that we're Seventh-day Adventists, aren't we? And we're supposed to be giving a warning about receiving the mark of the beast, the number of his name, the image of the beast, right? So we're supposed to be experts on the image of the beast, the mark of the beast, the number of his name. And the United States is going to form an image to and of the beast, is it not? And who's the beast? The papacy. And this beast in relation to the United States is found in what chapter in Revelation? Revelation 13. And the beast, that is the papacy in Revelation 13, what's its primary characteristic? It's wounded by the sword yet lives. The power in the Bible that is wounded by a sword but lives is Rome. And every Seventh-day Adventist should know that. It's not Islam. It's Rome. How hard is that one? It's pretty hard. Went over everyone's head because there was an argument going on. But if you're going to use Miller's rules and you're going to take your concordance and you're going to look for the power that's been wounded by the sword yet lived, who is it? It's the papacy. It's Rome. So we're going to be back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Is that the plan? Is there anything else we need to do to...
The word sword is actually a dart. It's not really a sword because somebody was trying to flag.
Okay, Sister Tanya and I want to be clear, because Sister Tanya and I have such a good rapport, a long-term rapport, that she's liable to say things like that. And if you're a newbie in here, you may not understand it, so I want to make sure we all understand the distinction that she is making, okay? Because it's a good distinction. Her and I often don't really disagree. I agree with what she's saying. I believe that when we find a word or a phrase in the Scriptures, that we should take the time to see where it occurs in the Scripture in a variety of ways. If you get in your concordance, that word might be translated differently, in a different English word. You want to look at everywhere it occurs to wrap your mind around what that Hebrew or Greek word means. That's what she does. But my argument here is at the basic level. And the basic level, and this is something you may not have internalized, and once I tell it to you, you may think it's a little bit fanatical, but it is absolutely essential. And it's this. We're Millerite proof texters, which means that we're following the rules of William Miller, his example. And his example was a Cruden's Concordance with no reference to the Hebrew or Greek. So whether you understood it or not, William Miller was deriving his understanding from the King James Version. Now there may be words in the King James that are translated, two different Hebrew words that are translated as the same word, such as the word vision is, from various Hebrew words. Or there may be a Hebrew word that when you get to the Hebrew or the Greek level, you may see other places that these words occur, but you are totally safe. In fact, it is what you're supposed to do to allow the King James to define by proof texting what is the first meaning. So if you're strictly using Miller's rules and going by the King James, then you don't have to worry that the sword in verse 8 of Joel chapter 2 is actually in the Hebrew a dart. Okay, because it says sword. And it was wounded. And the one that's wounded with the sword in Revelation 13 is Rome. So I don't have a problem with the level she takes it to. But Miller's rules, it's the English of the King James. Does that sound fanatical? Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we understand that there's probably only a handful, or more than a handful, but not very many Sabbaths that your people can come together and study your word in the ease that we're having here this evening, tomorrow. The troublous times aren't simply on the horizon, they are here. We just haven't recognized it yet because of the comforts that surround us in this modern life. But as we have this Sabbath where we can relax and listen to your word without threats of persecution, we ask that you would bless us with the light of your word, that we might come away from this Sabbath under great conviction of our need to study your word like never before and bring our lives into agreement with your word. We want to be changed into your image, and we know that this can only be accomplished through the power of your word, and only when that word is taken into us internally can this happen. We ask that this weekend, as nothing else, would give us a hunger and a thirst to feed upon your word as never before. As we part this evening, we ask that you give us traveling mercies to wherever we may be going, and that you give us a good night's rest and bring us back here refreshed tomorrow, that we can pursue this study. We want to understand what it means that you're now raising up a priesthood to finish this work. And we want to be part of that number if at all possible. And we thank you for these things in Jesus' name. Amen.